The fan controls in classical Resident Evil games have long been associated with creating core tension, but their true origin lies in technical limitations of the era. While they unintentionally contributed to the sense of fear and vulnerability, the primary reason for their existence was the constraints of the hardware and game engine capabilities of the mid to late 1990s. One of the defining features of the original Resident Evil 1916 was its use of fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. These design choices were made due to the PlayStation's limited processing power. Fully 3D environments would have been too demanding for the hardware at the time, so developers opted for detailed, static images with character models rendered in real time. However, this introduced a problem. Movement needed to be consistent regardless of camera placement. Tank controls were the solution. Instead of directional movement based on the camera's perspective, players would always rotate their character left or right and move forward or backward regardless of how the camera angle changed. This ensured that movement remained predictable, preventing sudden disorientation with transitioning between different camera viewpoints. When Resident Evil was in development, the PlayStation did not yet support analog sticks, as the dual analog and DualShock controls weren't released until after the first game. This meant movement had to be handled via the D-pad, which lacked the nuanced directional input of an analog stick. The fan control scheme worked well with this limitation, allowing players to navigate reliably with only 4 directional inputs. Additionally, real-time character movement in 3D was still in its infancy, and most games that attempted free movement with pre-rendered backgrounds often resulted in clunky or inconsistent controls. Capcom's approach ensured that players had a functional and intuitive way to navigate their environments without interference from sudden camera angle shifts. As gaming hardware improved, Capcom gradually moved away from tank controls. By the time Resident Evil 4 in 2005 was released, real-time 3D environments and more powerful consoles allowed for an over-the-shoulder camera with fully analog movement, eliminating the need for tank controls entirely. The transition away from pre-rendered backgrounds meant that character movement no longer had to account for shifting camera angles, allowing for a more natural control scheme. While some argue that tank controls added to the survival horror atmosphere by making movement feel restrictive, their implementation was primarily dictated by the technological constraints of the time. The decision was less about intentionally making players feel vulnerable and more about ensuring a functional, stable control system given the limitations of hardware and game design at the time. Classical Resident Evil games use tank controls out of necessity, not purely as a horror design choice. The limitation of pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera angles, and early console hardware dictated this movement system. While tank controls inadvertently contributed to the tension of the game, their primary purpose was to ensure consistent and functional navigation in a visually detailed but technically constrained environment. As technology advanced, Capcom abandoned tank controls in favor of more intuitive movement systems, proving that their use was a product of necessity rather than deliberate horror design.